Hello, my name is Camilla, and I will share with you a presentation that was put together for June 6th for the Collett's Corner project, which is being developed by AHU, Office for Holistic Urbanism. This presentation has 4 parts: an update since we last met, March 27th, the announcement for the design competition and details about that, and the bulk of the presentation is a background about what a design concept is and what we're expecting from design teams. The 4th part of this presentation included a discussion that was not recorded and it will not be included in this presentation here online. For a project update, since we last met in March and what we've actually been up to as a team, we've announced the preferred option, which we'll show you shortly here. We've refined the timeline. We've refined the financial modeling, and we've launched the design competition. The work that we're currently doing is we've approached our first round of investors. We've developed, and we are in the process of developing the legal structures. We are seeking directors for AHU and Collett's Corner. And a big thing that we're starting to move towards is planning for the equity crowdfunding, which will be launched in February of 2019. The now preferred version and option that we're going forward with for this building, after having met with the community at large and listening deeply into what's really possible for this site, we will have a cinema, an apart hotel, which works a lot like small apartments that get rented like hotels, and you could also have standard hotel rooms, co-working space, restaurant and shop, and in the basement, a bathhouse. Some of the architectural teams have already asked if the programs, the functions have to stay on the various levels. They do not. They can be mixed up and they can be changed they do not have to stay on the current floor levels. The project timeline, we've now moved from the scoping phase and are firmly now in the design and planning phase. In this phase, we will be seeking the business owners. If anybody knows any business owners who would like to take up owning any of the businesses, please get in touch with us. We will run the design competition, which just launched last Friday. We will appoint the design team on the back of the winning entry for the design competition. We will apply for the consents, and we will be running an equity crowdfunding campaign to raise capital for construction. That will be an opportunity for the wider public to invest in this building and be part owners of it. The plan is to have construction run from August to November. Of course, that's dependent on consents and things out of our hands, but that's currently what we believe is realistic and possible. And then we will be celebrating the opening in 2020 of December. We've updated our financial projections. These are still very early, and as we develop the design, these financial projections will be adjusted. So these are largely done on a cost per square meter building rate, and we will refine that as the design matures. The total cost of the building, including land, fees, contingencies, debt costs, etc., is estimated at $9.2 million. The construction cost is roughly $7 million. Share a little bit about how the team and the organizational structure is coming together. We have 9 members on the AHU Foundation team. And that there have a wide background and a wide set of skills and are really stewarding the overall AHU project and mission. Then we have our AHU Limited team. Currently the company is called AHU Development Limited, and we are now about to change it to simply AHU Limited. And on that team we have 7 different members. And then we're very well supported by a team of legal advisors, and each one of those law firms is starting to show up on different projects to give strong legal advice and set some, let's say, foundational documents for each of the projects. The way that the company is structured and the way that Collett's Corner will work in relationship to these other entities is that Collett's Corner will be initially established by AHU Limited, and then AHU Limited will hold and then distribute shares of Collett's Corner in lieu of equity. The profit from AHU Limited for the shares that it remains with after having distributed the majority of the shares the profit will go to the OHU Foundation, which we're seeking a charitable status for, and that profit will then be reinvested into future communities that want to collectively own property developments. The reason for this structure is so that we can set up a regenerative economic investment system and continue to grow and develop property developments that build communities. The team that's currently working on Collett's Corner of this wider OHU team includes myself. I'm the project steward and will remain the project steward through to opening. James Stewart is the managing partner for OHU Limited, and he is also supporting with helping develop the financial projections. He's a financial analyst by trade. Karen Sanderson is our project manager and works with Catalyst as well, and she's overseeing a lot of the project management work for Collett's Corner. Saskia Tranter, who's just joined our team, is our magician and amazing help when it comes to setting up all of the events and shouting out wide and far and helping us with our communication. So she's will be showing up quite a bit when it comes to the newsletter and social media and events. Rob Christella is our right arm when it comes to doing our financial analysis, and he's working very closely with James Stewart. On the legal side, we have Parry Field is supporting on Collett's Corner, and they're helping us develop the Constitution and the shareholding structures and the likes of the legal documents. So we'll now move over into the design competition. It's obviously for this 3 to 11 London Street, which is a prime corner site in Littleton, which has been, as we know, those of us who are here in Christchurch, extremely hard hit by the earthquakes, and Littleton lost a great deal of its, let's say, prominent buildings. So this is a site that we look forward to seeing what we can bring back to this small township. The competition timeline, we've launched it on the, I think the launch date was on the 1st of June, and we had the public presentation just last night, and which is essentially the presentation that I'm giving to you here. The deadline for submissions for stage 1 are on the 29th at 4 p.m. There's an online public voting which will open on the 2nd of July and run until the 4th of July. There will be a full exhibition at Exchange, which is 376 Wilson's Road in Christchurch, for one day from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. of all entries. The competition teams who would like to are welcome to come between 5 and 7, and the public is welcome as well, and there can be a round of questions and answers, and people can start to share a little bit more about their concepts. There will be 3 finalists selected to go forward, and we will, that's the beginning of what would be the next concept, or the next phase of stage 2. And in the stage 2, you'll have 8 weeks to develop a concept further. And there will be, again, an online vote for the 3rd until the 6th. So you have 3 days for an open online voting. And there'll be a public presentation by the 3 winning teams from 6 to 8 p.m., venue to be determined. And the winning team will be announced on the 14th of September. So please, if you are listening to this, please get in behind these exhibitions and the open voting so we know what it is that the public is interested in. The details of the competition brief, we have the whole brief and all of its details are online on OHU's website on the Collett's Corner page. You can download the full brief. We're receiving questions and posting those answers online on the same page. The submissions for stage 1 is 1A3 for a design concept, and much of this presentation coming up is about what a design concept is and what we're expecting, and 1A3 for your team. And we're, because OHU's namesake is about building communities by building buildings, we're very much so about the people behind the projects, and so we really want to know who you are and what skills you're going to be bringing to the wider OHU team and how we can align on purpose. For the stage 2 submission, you'll have 2 A3s for a developed concept, and you'll be able to submit an A4 document to summarize the developed concept. That is not a limited that's not limited by page numbers. The jury is Andrew Turner, who's our deputy mayor here, and he also formerly owned the Empire Hotel. And unfortunately, at the time of drafting this presentation, Pip Cheshire is no longer going to be a juror with us, so we will be looking for another juror. And then I will be the juror for on behalf of OHU. We'll be looking for an architect and or a strong designer to represent the design profession. Unfortunately, Pip was quite strongly of the mind that the competition should be anonymous, and because of the purpose that is behind OHU and that it's effectively about people, we found a difference of opinion there, and we've very politely and very graciously decided that it was probably best that he wasn't a juror at this time, and he has stepped aside. That also brings up the other question that's been in the background and come up quite a lot. NZIA is not endorsing this competition, and it's probably important for architects to know that. You're still very much so welcome to join the competition. The main reason they're not endorsing it is because it is not an anonymous competition, and the teams behind these entries are as important to OHU as the designs are, because we will all be working together. And so we want to know who you are, and we want to know how you align to what it is that OHU is trying to create through the Collett's Corner project. So a little bit about that. And let's see, the selection from the stage 1, there'll be 3 finalists, as I mentioned, that'll move on to stage 2 or invited in to do stage 2. And the stage 2, the winning team will receive $10,000, and the second and third prize will each receive $5,000 as award and as a contribution for their time. The evaluation criteria, we're really very interested in, particularly stage 1, the concept and how the concept can be used as a guide throughout the design process. And the other key component is how does the concept align to the purpose that we're trying to realize through this project. And the other things that will be important, but not necessarily as much so in stage 1, will be the function, the execution, the innovation, and your team. So yeah, those things are valued and considered. In stage 2, the weighting shifts slightly, and it really does start to get a little bit stronger. And can we actually build this? Can it meet budgets? You know, how do we actually make sure that the building that we're creating is as affordable and possible, and etc. And then the team skills at that stage become a little more valuable, and making sure that we're bringing a team together that they can actually deliver what it is they're drawing. And so all the criteria that we have shown here is also in the design brief. And so you can download this and refer to it later if you need to. So the next part of this presentation, which is the majority, is really about what a design concept is. And so I'm sharing this for a couple of reasons. One is to make sure that the architects aren't overextending themselves. We don't really want everybody to do really a lot of work. We're looking for just some initial ideas. And so this is one way to kind of, let's say, caution doing way too much work, and also be able to make the selection quite early on. And the second reason is the public. And when you're voting on design, please know that you're not getting a building, you're getting a very early design concept. And so I wanted to make sure that the public, when they were voting, had an idea of what a design concept is. So that's why I've prepared this presentation and the slides to follow. So a design concept is a raison d'etre. It's the very similar to the purpose that might sit behind and underneath a business. And so we can look at it like a guiding principle. It's the reason for being. It's what guides our rationale. And I think the French saying of raison d'etre is the best way that I've ever captured what a concept is. This is a great image of what one feels like. It's the tiny little rudder on a massive tanker, and so it's often quite small, but it ends up being quite strong in how it guides a huge ship. The concept is at the heart of guiding our decisions, and it's very much so used as a wayfinding device. It's also extremely useful when mobilizing large and diverse teams. And so if you have a strong concept behind a project, it's much easier to galvanize a huge broad range of interests, and so we all start to move in the same direction. I put this slide together when I was teaching some years ago, and it's often how we also use a design concept through developing a design. At each stage of a design, there are many decisions to be made, and what we often do as designers is study it through options. And when you have a strong concept, you can evaluate your options based on what the concept is and whether we're achieving it through the various studies. So from here, I'm going to share a handful of what are strong concepts and examples of concepts so that people have a better idea of what the various designers will be showing up with in about a month's time. This was a competition that I worked on when I worked at OMA in Holland. It's called Leal and in Paris. And it was for the Arrondissement 1, which is the neighborhood 1 in Paris. And if you know Paris, it works like a spiral and spirals out from neighborhood 1 out to 19. And so the competition was looking at the redesign of the center of Paris. On the right is the Pompidou, and on the bottom left is the Louvre, and the blue at the bottom is the Seine, to give you some orientation as to where we are. The competition was for the urban block, where the green circles are, and about the wider block that surrounds. The concept was for, if you look at the diagram below where it says existing, that was the a diagrammatic section of what was happening underground. And so underneath Leal, in the underground, was a huge city where about 5 million people a day were passing through a highway, a massive major metro stop in the city for their subway system, a huge multi-cineplex, a major sports center with swimming pools, a huge parking garage, an enormous amount of entertainment space and shopping space, commercial space. So much of this had zero relationship with above ground, and it was very hard to know where you were in relationship to above ground. And so our concept is to do effectively acupuncture and pull the various functions that were below ground and reveal them above ground. So you had a better idea in relationship to what was happening below and above ground. And so when we're talking about a concept, this is the kind of concept, this is the kind of thinking that we're looking for the Collett's Corner project. Obviously a very, very different project, but in the nature of what it is, the level of work that we're looking for, this is the kind of idea that we're after. A concept image for that project was essentially the iceberg. Below you may have this massive, massive, massive world or form and activities. And above ground, you just want some indication of what's happening below ground. These were a few of the models that were developed for that competition. A second project that we'll share with you was developed by 3 students that were part of Studio Christchurch. And they developed this when we were studying what was called the blueprint, which was developed in the post-earthquake context as a master plan for a redesign of the central city in Christchurch. And they were looking at one aspect of the blueprint called the south frame. And the south frame runs east-west between Tuam Street and St. Asaph Street. And there's the Hagley Park to the west. Some very initial kind of contextual images show that the streets were both linear, quite monotonous, and littered with big box retail, so there was a lot of anonymity. And yet you had the Avon River nearby, and so their concept was to zip that together. And so this was the concept image that they started to then work with and bring through their various work. The way they developed that was to look at the view corridors that were possible and passages that were possible through the north-south connections. And a lot of this was made possible because many of the buildings were demolished, and so there were unique passages that opened up in the post-earthquake context. And from that, they developed an east-west connection and some north-south connections and gave them unique identities based on the adjacent buildings. And this was a rendering that they prepared to show how you might break up that long, linear, monotonous street. A third one, another urban scale concept, was developed when I worked again at OMA on a competition for Ghent. And this was another quick concept, again, an idea that starts to galvanize a wide team and gives direction to decision making. This was for an area outside of the very medieval town of Ghent. And the medieval town had these really beautiful small web-like streets, but very no grid form to them and no real sense of north-south orientation, except for when you get over to the harbor. And this harbor, like so many harbors in the world, as containerization moved into the major form of moving goods around the world, many of the old harbors were left and new harbors built closer to the ocean. So this was one such case. And so this was an area that was ready for, let's say, redevelopment, and I had been falling to disuse, and yet populations were growing, so they were looking at how this could be an auxiliary part of their city within walking distance. And that to the east, where it's gray, is it shows a huge parking or a huge train yard, and so that would create a really strong back edge to the harbor to the west. And so we were trying to figure out how we would not create such a strong back edge, and what we ended up doing is taking the urban fabric that was running north-south and turned it 90 degrees and made it run east-west. And the way that we developed that is by looking at some of the existing context. There were some existing buildings that could be retained, that had some character. Many of the buildings were quite falling down and needed to be removed. We took the streets from across the harbor and projected them over, mostly to give some sort of, let's say, large perspectives, long perspectives. In this medieval town, you never really gained perspective because you were always going around corners and curves, and so there was no long views, and something really unique about the harbor was a long view, so we wanted to create that in the streets as well, to give a unique identity, an urban identity to that area. In order to come up with the banding, we took the buildings from across the harbor and projected them across, and that gave us the unique banding, and then we decided to layer in the program relative to the different widths. And when we layered all that together, we got our master plan, and that was how we developed the concept of turning the fabric, of the urban fabric. A concept that was developed at Herzog and de Meuron, part of the Parish Art Museum, is a building concept. And this one was for an art museum in the Hamptons. And it was developed based on having seen a lot of barn architecture in the surrounding area. And barns are typically built with a repeating structure, a module that gets repeated many times. And so for the Parish Art Museum, what Herzog and de Meuron have done is taken a repeating structural module and repeated it a number of times. And so this was the typical section, and this is what it looks like today. And it's 200 meters long, and you have the same structure repeated the entire length. But what's really quite special, I mean, obviously it's quite a bold and strong move, and you're coming off of a really simple concept of studying the barn structures. This is what it looks like outside. There's one bench that runs the entire length and looks over a field, creating a very interesting public space. But what's quite beautiful about a repeating module is that you can create variation depending on how you arrange your walls inside. And so in some instances you might get a single gallery, or you might get a double gallery, which is more of a breezeway across the building, or you might get a double gallery that's in within one gable. And in some of the spacing, you might even be able to break up one of the modules into two smaller galleries. So you can get quite a bit of variation just depending on how you arrange your walls within this repeating form. And that tends to be a really good way to create affordable design. Anything that becomes modular and repetitive is often a great way to bring costs down. So this is what it looks like today. This is the breezeway gallery, so it goes across the two gables. This is a single gallery, and this is what it looks like looking down that corridor. The last one that I'll show you is another one that was done by Herzog and de Meuron, And Herzog and de Meuron is well known for their material investigation and using materials as a means by which to derive concepts. And so this concept is that I'll share with you is around roughness. Most of and many of Herzog and de Meuron's buildings are really deep investigations into materiality, and they become these really quite beautiful, iconic forms in cities. The Schaulager, which is storage in German, is for an art collection, and it was on the outskirts of Basel, Switzerland. And the concept here is roughness. And so what they did, and they took that from looking at the soil that was on the site and found that it had a very rough-like texture, and they wanted to recreate that in the texture of the concrete. And so they would cast the concrete, and before it was fully formed, they'd pull the formwork off and hammer it. So you got this really rough textured facade. And for the apertures, they ended up taking a tube and hammering it and then rolling it, actually digitizing that and scaling it, and then printing that in 3D material in a 3D printer, and coming up with a form to cast in the concrete. And so you created a rough aperture. So again, using the notion of roughness to inform the design decisions. The loading dock facade was another version of playing with roughness. They took the concrete facade, cast it, and then scaled it by 10, and then laid the metal facade over it and hammered it, and that gave the metal facade another form of roughness that would appear adjacent to the concrete facade. And they considered it even down to the paving. How could you create a rough textured paving by giving it a texture? So this predominantly looks like a large rough form in the middle of what is otherwise a kind of a residential area outside of Basel. And to accentuate the roughness, they created a cut into it. And so by contrasting the roughness with a smooth form, you actually accentuate the roughness that much more. Inside, it's treated a lot like, let's say, a solid volume that then has an atrium cut into it to give it and accentuate that feeling of massiveness. And the shop, which is behind this audience of people, they ended up taking that same tube that was used for the aperture, for the opening windows, and then scaling that up and casting a form and rolling that quite literally to create a plastic interior-like rough cave for the bookshop. So that's a series of concepts now, just to illustrate what a concept is. And now what I'd like to do is sort of shift us out of this kind of last era of architecture and what's been governing architecture in the way of concept design. And like any philosophy or arts, humanities, they're always evolving. And so I think what I would love to be able to put in front of the architects and architectural teams and artists that may be participating in this is how could we take what we knew were extremely formal concepts, very interesting in their time, but how can we actually take the notion of a concept and derive let's say, concepts that come from social connections. So I'm really curious if there's an opportunity to explore that through the concepts that the teams develop. They're not required, but I would say that's like, I guess, a hope and a wish and maybe a dream that something like that might come through. For all of the work that AHU is developing, it's very much so people-focused. It's in our namesake. AHU in Tadeo means people working together. But it is also design-led, and so we want to create spaces that give us pride and create memories and places that we enjoy being. A lot of people ask how they can stay informed and or get involved. This is how you can do that. Share us on Facebook. Join us on the Collett's Corner Facebook page or on the OHU page. Please
share this competition brief with your design friends. Vote for your preferred design concept. Come to the design exhibition and the discussion on July 4th and the presentations on the September 7th. Tell your friends about Collett's Corner if you're excited about this project, and connect us with possible business owners. That's what we really need right now. And that's the end of this presentation. Thank you for listening.